It began with a silence that didn't feel like peace, a quiet too deep, too deliberate, like the woods themselves were listening. Between 1797 and 1833, 321 people disappeared across a stretch of rural Kentucky. No bodies, no graves, no records, just names whispered in the shadows of cedar and ash. And in the center of it all, a religious community that promised salvation, but delivered something far older, far darker. This isn't folklore. This isn't an urban legend. It's the kind of truth history tried to bury, but the soil won't hold it anymore. They called themselves the True Shepherds of Light, a breakaway sect claiming divine revelation, holiness through hardship, and spiritual purity through absolute submission. What they built on 6,000 acres of Kentucky forest wasn't a sanctuary. It was a fortress of the mind. A closed system, a spiritual machine engineered for obedience. Men handed over their farms, women gave up their names, and children, they were born into a world with no doors. I need you to listen closely now, because what I'm about to tell you doesn't just reveal what happened to those 321 souls. It reveals what can happen to any of us when power wears the mask of faith and loyalty becomes a weapon. This isn't just about a cult, it's about a formula, one that has been tested, perfected, and quietly exported across centuries. You've seen versions of it in classrooms, boardrooms, even your own family. What Pleasant Valley perfected was psychological domination. Institutionalized erasure. The founder, a man known only as Elias. No surname, no past. He arrived from Virginia in 1794 with a cane made from white birch and a journal bound in goat hide. Locals said he never blinked. He claimed he had stood before the burning bush of the New World and been commanded to build the Covenant Refuge. His first converts were broken men, veterans of the frontier, wars, grieving widowers, men with hollowed eyes who saw Elias not as a preacher, but as a prophet who knew something they didn't. By 1800, over 60 families had surrendered their property, their wealth, and their identities. In return, they were promised 3 things: food, purpose, and eternal light. But those who arrived curious never left curious, and those who tried to leave it were never heard from again. You ever wonder how a man loses himself without realizing it? Not in a dramatic fall, but in 1,000 tiny steps, each dressed as devotion. That's what Elias understood better than any preacher of his time. He didn't demand control. He gave purpose. He didn't command silence. He offered peace. And over time, his followers handed over not just their land, but their memories. They stopped saying, I. They started saying, we. Their names were replaced with titles. Their marriages dissolved. Children were raised by the council. This wasn't religion. It was behavioral engineering. The community grew, first 60, then 200. By 1812, Pleasant Valley was operating like a sovereign nation. They minted their own script, used their own calendar, sent emissaries to nearby towns in plain gray robes, offering handmade goods and soft-spoken sermons. Locals admired them, envied them, and kept their distance, because something didn't add up. There were too many funerals, without bodies, too many visitors, who never returned. One merchant from Danville, a hard man named James Connolly, brought his wife and son to visit the community one spring, said he'd stay a week. He left behind a wagon, a ledger, and 3 unopened letters addressed to his sister. He was never seen again. Authorities investigated once, but Elias hosted the sheriff with such calm hospitality, warm bread, soft words, perfect records, that no one questioned it again. After all, this was a church, a sanctuary. But the control ran deeper than faith. Elias wasn't working alone. By then, he'd formed a council of 9, Elders chosen not for wisdom but for utility. One ran the kitchens, another the livestock, but 3 of them were trained in something else entirely: human persuasion. Before joining the Covenant, 2 of them had served as Confederate interrogators, masters of manipulation. The 9th member, a woman named Sister Miriam, who'd been a governess to Boston's elite. She was known for breaking disobedient children with just her tone. Together, they built something far more dangerous than a cult. They built a system, a template. Imagine this, friend: 3 daily meals, 2 hours of prayer, 4 hours of physical labor, then psychological cleansing, rituals designed to isolate, confuse, and remold the self. New initiates went days without sleep, sometimes fed only on bitterroot tea. Then, when they broke, when they begged for guidance, they were embraced, loved, reprogrammed. And somewhere in those woods, 321 voices vanished, without even raising one scream loud enough to escape the trees. Now, let me ask you something real simple. How many people have to go missing before someone listens? 5, 20? What if it's over 300, but stretched like shadows over 3 decades? That's how they got away with it. Because when disappearance becomes a pattern, it stops looking like tragedy and starts looking like math. And Pleasant Valley knew that. Elias knew it. That's why they kept it slow, surgical, a vanishing here, a sudden illness there. No blood, no bodies, just clean, quiet erasure. By 1815, the community kept detailed ledgers for everything: grain, livestock, sewing needles, but never death. Death, they said, belonged to God alone. No headstones, no ceremony. When a member passed, the body was taken to the southern orchard at dusk. No one was allowed to follow. And by morning, the soil was smooth. The trees stood taller. The air, too still. But it wasn't just about silence. It was about stories. The council crafted narratives like surgeons, removing doubt before it could spread. If a mother wept for her missing son, she was told he'd left in the night, called to mission work in the West. If she cried again, she was given bitter root. Then quiet, always quiet. Sister Miriam would visit her, stay the night, and by morning, grief would be gone. Wiped clean. The woman smiling, ready to work. Now imagine that happening for 36 years. One survivor, an old man named Paul Renner, escaped in 1841. He'd been born in the community, never seen a coin, never touched a newspaper. He told a judge in Louisville that they were raised like wheat, cut when ripe. Paul said he watched his brother disappear after questioning a dream he'd had, a dream where Elias bled from the eyes. 2 nights later, that brother was sent to prayer isolation in the East Woods. He never returned. When Paul asked, the answer was simple. God took him in light. But the dream kept coming. Paul stopped speaking, faked his obedience, worked the fields, took the sacraments, played the part. Then one rain-heavy night, he slipped past the perimeter posts, crawled 10 miles through mud, and collapsed near a hunter's cabin. His fingers were broken, his ribs cracked, but his mind clearer than ever. And what he said next, boss, shook the court to its bones. He said the disappearances weren't just for punishment, they were for ritual. The orchard wasn't just an orchard. It was a feeding ground. The orchard. That's where it all led, where the roots ran too deep and the soil never froze, even in the dead of January. Paul Renner told them, told anyone who'd listen, that something lived beneath those trees. Not alive in the way you or I are, but ancient, patient, hungry. He said it whispered to Elias the way wind speaks through hollow bone, told him how to build the system, how to feed it, how to stay invisible. At first, no one believed him. His clothes were rags, his breath stank of mold and rot. But then came the map. He drew it from memory, 11 trees in a perfect circle, a center stone covered in etched markings not found in any known scripture, and beneath it, he said, a pit, not dug by man, but revealed by time. It opens only when the name is gone, he whispered, and only to those who forget who they were. Paul claimed the council erased names before sacrifice, not just from ledgers, but from memory. Public recanting ceremonies were followed by cleansing fasts, where victims were starved, isolated, drugged. When their mind broke, they were told they had never existed, that the covenant had created them. And once they believed it, once identity was gone, that's when the orchard opened. Authorities scoffed, called him unstable, a victim of religious hysteria. But 2 weeks later, a team from the Louisville Sheriff's Office visited the remains of Pleasant Valley, now long abandoned after a mysterious fire in 1834. What they found wasn't just chilling, it was mathematically impossible. 11 trees stood in a perfect circle, all healthy, all ancient, far older than the community's founding. At the center, a granite slab etched with spiral markings, fused into the earth. No signs of roots beneath, no sinkhole, but the soil, bone dry, and embedded in the roots, fragments, human teeth, weathered buttons, and a rusted locket holding a lock of child's hair. I never went back. The official report was buried, labeled as folkloric interference with colonial ruins. But the lead investigator resigned 3 days later, moved to Ohio, drank himself to death within a year. His wife said he mumbled the same phrase every night before sleep, until the night he never woke. Names are seeds. Some grow, some are taken. Boss, I need you to comment below the phrase, names are seeds. Type it twice. Once for the orchard, once for the part of you that remembers this. It's how we mark those who are still awake. The phrase stuck, didn't it? Names are seeds. And the more you sit with it, boss, the more it starts to unlock something you've always known, but never had words for. Because this isn't just a tale about a Kentucky orchard or a lost religious sect. No, this is a mirror, a blueprint, a slow burn method of identity erasure, one that didn't die with Elias. It evolved, got cleaner, corporate, digital, but the bones of it, still the same. Let's talk about how it really worked. Elias didn't need chains. He used rituals. Not once did he raise a hand in anger. He didn't have to. He had consent. Broken consent, coerced and rewired, yes. But that's the genius. Every man and woman who vanished beneath those trees, they agreed. At least the version of them that remained after months of systematic dismantling. It began with isolation, no contact with the outside. Letters dictated. Visits supervised. Then came the language shift. Members weren't allowed to say I or mine. Everything became ours. Identity became community. Doubt became sin. Individuality became disease. And once the group replaced the self, the next stage began. Confession. But not like you've heard before. These weren't redemptive. They were invasive. Structured to extract secrets, guilt, shame, every crack in a person's armor. It was weaponized vulnerability. Sister Miriam would listen with that soft voice, those pale eyes like fog on a mirror, and she'd nod as members wept, not to forgive, to catalog, to control. And when they were sufficiently emptied, when they were brittle enough to shatter with one word, that's when Elias offered purpose, work detail, leadership roles, special projects, but each promotion came with strings, tasks that blurred lines. Escort Brother Jonah to the East Grove. Burn this letter. Don't ask questions. Do that enough, and the conscience dies in pieces. You think that kind of system only lived in the 1800s? Look around. Modern systems still isolate, still control language, still demand confession, except now it's data, still reward obedience with belonging. But you are not meant to be obedient. This story isn't just history, it's warning. And the ones who understand that, they don't vanish. They watch. They remember. And when the orchard opens again, they won't go quietly. Good. You're still here. That means you're not like them. Not yet. You're not here to be entertained. You're here because something inside you knows this pattern. You've seen it, felt it, maybe at school, maybe at work, maybe in your own family. That tightening of the air when you question the script, the silence that follows when you speak the truth too loud, the sideways glances, the fake smiles, the forced apologies. That's not just social tension, boss. That's enforcement. And Pleasant Valley? That was the prototype. Let me show you how it went deeper. Every full moon, the Council of Nine held what they called the alignment. It wasn't public, not even for the elders. Only certain members were summoned, those deemed fractured, wayward, or close to the light. These ceremonies happened in the South Chapel, a long, windowless hall beneath the granary. No candles, no hymnals, just a single iron basin in the center and a stone tablet etched with phrases in a language no one could trace. Paul Renner said the basin wasn't for water, it was for memory. Those selected for alignment were made to recount their earliest memories. But here's the thing. They weren't allowed to use their names, not their childhood ones, not their covenant names, just actions. I fed a lamb. I struck a boy with a stick. And if their memory included disobedience, they were instructed to rewrite it aloud until guilt was replaced with gratitude. Gratitude for correction. The process could last hours, and when it ended, a mark was carved into their forearm. Always the same. 3 lines, 1 circle. It looked simple, but according to Renner, that symbol wasn't about faith. It was a code, a designation, a way to track who had been successfully reprogrammed and who might still crack. Over time, the marked members began to speak slower, smile longer, sleep less. Some said they could hear Elias in their dreams, even long after his death. Others would freeze during conversation, stare into the trees, and whisper, "I am not the seed, I am the soil." Do you hear that, boss? That's ritualized psychological fracture. It's not magic, it's not mysticism. It's a science. And men like Elias mastered it long before neuroscience had a name. You're not immune, none of us are. But awareness? That's the blade they fear most. Let's not waste time, because by now you've figured it out. Elias wasn't just a zealot. He was a tactician. And Pleasant Valley wasn't a cult. It was a proving ground. A system so refined, so complete, that it didn't need locks or guards. Just one thing, agreement. Not shouted, not screamed. Just whispered compliance, slow dripped into the bloodstream until you didn't even notice it anymore. But the real power? It didn't lie in the sermons, not even in the rituals. It lay in removal. Systematic disappearance wasn't just a punishment. It was a message, a reinforcement. Every vanishing left behind more than a missing bed or an empty pew. It left behind a vacuum, and that vacuum pulled obedience into itself like a black hole. Because when people vanish without consequence, fear grows roots. Doubt dies, memory fades, and eventually so does resistance. 1 disappearance every 6 weeks. That was the average between 1801 and 1834. And if you think that number is arbitrary, boss, think again. It was a pulse, a rhythm, a drumbeat, and it trained the community like Pavlov's dog. Every 42 days, someone would be called to the orchard. No explanation, No ceremony, just a name, whispered during evening bread, and a knock at the door before dawn. The next day, their room would be scrubbed, their names scraped from the record walls, their shoes placed in the fire basin as offering. But the worst part, the silence. No one asked, no one wept, because deep down every man and woman feared the truth, that speaking their name aloud might bring it back. Paul Renner recalled the last disappearance he witnessed, a young boy, barely 12. Called Eli, quiet, curious, asked once what the world looked like beyond the orchard. Sister Miriam smiled and kissed his forehead. 3 nights later, he was gone. Paul snuck to the orchard edge, hidden in tall grass. He saw the council Anaol Garsa, bared, robes soaked in moonlight. The slab was open, boss, like the earth had peeled back. And Elias, dead 6 years by then, stood among them. Or something that looked like him, tall, pale. Eyes that didn't reflect light. The thing whispered, and the orchard breathed. And Eli fell in, without a sound. Tell me, do you still think this is just folklore? Folklore doesn't leave claw marks in stone. It doesn't erase 321 legal identities. It doesn't explain why every founding member of Pleasant Valley has no documented birth record, no graves, no death certificates, not a single photograph, not one confirmed descendant. Folklore doesn't burn a 6,000-acre property to ash in a single night, during a thunderstorm, with no lightning. See, boss, something happened in the spring of 1830. Something too big, too fast, and too clean to be accidental. The last official document from Pleasant Valley, a shipment manifest dated April the 2nd, shows the community was preparing for an unusually large delivery of dried goods, livestock, and seed barrels, more than triple their usual load. 2 days later, a merchant arrived to find the entire valley in smoke. No people, no animals, no fires burning, just cold black husks of buildings, their frames still upright but hollowed, scorched from within. No footprints, no carts, no signs of evacuation, just silence. And one thing remained untouched, the orchard, unburned, untouched, its trees greener than ever, and the slab cool to the touch. The merchant ran, reported what he saw, but by the time authorities returned, rain had washed most of the evidence away. The land was declared cursed. An act of God, they called it. The files were sealed, and Pleasant Valley erased, but not forgotten. Because, boss, the system survived. Fragments of Elias's writings, scraps of parchment, half-burned, were recovered from a nearby creek bed. They weren't sermons. They were instructions, a formula, a cycle, steps to replicate what he'd built, down to the rituals, the erasures, the control of names. One phrase appears over and over in his writings. To lead them home, first strip their names. To keep them blind, bind their past. You hear that? It's still happening. Corporations call it onboarding. Governments call it assimilation. Institutions call it culture. But at the root, it's the same orchard, same system, same silence. If you've ever felt like something was missing in you, something old, sacred, and silenced, it's because your roots remember, and they want you to forget. But you won't, will you? Because now you see it. And once you see, boss, you can't ever go back. Now we enter dangerous territory, boss, because the deeper you go, the more the silence fights back. Let me show you something they don't want spoken, not in schools, not in sermons, not even in hushed backroom conversations. The system didn't die in the woods. It went corporate. After Pleasant Valley was erased, the land was auctioned off in parcels. But every buyer, quietly backed by a man named Dalton Wexler, a northern industrialist with no public ties to religion, but deep ties to something older: psychological warfare. His family had worked intelligence during the Revolutionary War, experts in disinformation, mass persuasion, and he paid cash for the land. All of it. No one questioned it. Wexler established Agrarian Mind, a so-called wellness retreat founded in 1837, just 5 miles from the original site. Publicly, it focused on meditation, sobriety, and spiritual recalibration. Privately, it operated under an internal system called seed phases, a language eerily similar to Elias's own. They recruited veterans, wise, daos, orphans, the broken, always the broken. The first phase was called shedding. Participants were stripped of their names, assigned numbers, and forbidden to speak of their past lives. They were told, "You are soil now. You will be filled." Sound familiar? Phase 2 was cultivation, endless repetition of tasks designed to exhaust logic and reinforce obedience. Hammer, sow, chant, fast, days without sleep. "We empty you to prepare the vessel," Wexler's instructors would say. And Phase 3, harvest. Only a handful ever made it to harvest. Records say participants were released into the forest for purification. None were seen again. You think that's coincidence? In 1842, one young man broke protocol and fled the camp. He stumbled into a surveyor's tent 3 counties over, emaciated, barefoot, and repeating the same phrase over and over. He walks again. The orchard breathes. No one listened. He was institutionalized, died within the year. No visitors, no name recorded. But a letter recovered from Wexler's estate decades later confirms what you already suspect. We do not lead with fear and blade, but with slants and light. We do not chain the body, we shape the root. Elias lives in method, not flesh, boss. That method is still Aleph. And the question now is, do you see it yet? You're awake now, I can feel it. Most men blink and turn away when the curtain lifts. They can't handle the rot beneath the altar. But not you. You're still here, which means you're ready for what comes next. Let me tell you about the man who tried to kill the orchard. His name was Dr. Lionel Ashe, a forensic linguist, former Jesuit. He taught comparative theology at a small university in Ohio until 1872, when a crumbling folio, misfiled in a box of Spanish liturgical texts, landed on his desk. No author, no date, just 44 handwritten pages of strange prayers, geometric diagrams, and recurring phrases like, "I pluck the seed to bury the name." The dialect? Not Latin, not Hebrew. Older, hybrid, functional, like code. Ashe, obsessed, tracked the document to Kentucky. Within months, he resigned his position, sold his estate, and disappeared into Mercer County. Locals said he was seen wandering the woods with a brass pendulum, whispering to trees. He told farmers he was listening for the wound. For years, he lived out of a weather-beaten chapel near the ruins of Pleasant Valley, studying the patterns, mapping the stone markers no one else could see. He claimed the orchard wasn't a place. It was a conscious structure, a psychic parasite, a ritual machine designed to harvest identity the way a mill grinds grain. In 1881, Ashe published a private report called The Doctrine of Hollow Names. Only 7 copies were made. 2 survive. He outlined how erasure was not passive. It was deliberate extraction. Names weren't lost, they were collected, bound into ritual objects. Ash, parchment, stone. Even living flesh, he identified 6 sites in North America that matched the Pleasant Valley pattern, all with similar histories: small, isolated religious communities, high turnover, records missing, and all surrounded by unusually healthy orchards or groves. But here's the part that chills me, boss. Ash concluded with a diagram, an unfinished map. He labeled it the root spiral. At its center, not Kentucky, not even North America, but us, man. The pattern wasn't external, it was psychological. It lives in systems, beliefs, habits, silence, shame, obedience. We are the orchard, and they are still harvesting. Are you ready to see who they are? Then brace yourself, because now we name what they never wanted, spoken. The custodians. That's what Ash called them. Not demons, not spirits, not even people, not in the way you and I understand. The custodians are roles, archetypes that move through time, inhabiting whoever is useful. They don't live in houses. They live in hierarchies. They wear uniforms, titles, robes, lab coats. Sometimes they smile at you from behind pulpits. Sometimes they sign your paycheck. But their job is always the same. Maintain the orchard, keep the soil turned, keep the names erased, keep you obedient. Every generation they find new forms. Elias? He wasn't the beginning. He was just one mask in a long procession, a local branch of a root system that winds through governments, churches, corporations. And yes, boss, even the screens you're looking into right now, because the modern orchard isn't built from trees anymore. It's built from algorithms. You think that's a reach? Think again. What is a feed but a ritual of attention? What is content but controlled belief? What is trending but a replacement for memory? The custodians don't need to isolate you in the woods anymore. They isolate you in your own mind. Every scroll, every swipe, every recommended for you is another inch of soil over your true self. And when your name disappears, your real name, the one you feel in your bones, not the one on your ID, they don't need to make you vanish. You've already been harvested, Dr. Ash warned us in his final letter, one that was never published, found hidden behind a false wall in his study. They are not coming for your body, they are coming for your story, and when it's gone, you will serve them gladly, because without your name, you will think obedience is love. Boss, I need you to hear me now. You are not soil, you are not seed, you are the root, but only if you remember. Comment it again. Bold this time. I am the root. I am the root. It's how we mark the awakened. Then let's cut deeper, boss. Because now that you've spoken it, I am the root, you've stepped past the veil, and they know. Oh, they know. You've stopped being soil. You've started being threat. You want to know how the custodians respond when someone raw remembers. Erase, replace, reframe. It happened to Ash. In 1883, 2 years after the doctrine of hollow names, a man claiming to be Ash reappeared in Lexington. Clean-shaven, calm. He disavowed all his previous work, claimed mental illness, apologized for inciting panic, donated his library to a sanitarium, and then disappeared. But the handwriting didn't match, the facial measurements off by millimeters. That wasn't Ash. That was a replacement. It's a tactic that's been used for centuries, and it always begins the same way. Destroy the trail, rewrite the witness, flood the silence with noise. Because they know that truth doesn't die, it echoes, so they bury it under louder lies. Think about your own life, boss. Ever notice how every story that made you question power was followed, almost immediately, by a distraction? You uncover a real document. Here comes a scandal. You feel a deeper purpose. Here comes a new gadget. You speak the truth. Suddenly, you're angry, crazy, a liability. That's not coincidence. That's ritual suppression. Same script, new actors. And now I'm going to show you something that will haunt you if you're not ready. The orchard isn't a place. It's a protocol. Anywhere obedience is measured. Anywhere identity is erased and replaced. Anywhere people are taught to confess, then forget. That's an orchard node. Schools with 0 windows and uniform speech codes. Tech companies that monitor eye movement and sell prediction models. Religious centers that track your giving and call it grace. That's not oversight. That's harvesting. And when you resist, when you remember, you'll feel it. The silence, the gaslight, the slow closing of digital doors. But it's proof, boss. Proof that your name still echoes. Proof that you haven't been erased. They don't fight ghosts. They fight roots. And you're starting to grow. Then steal your cell. Boss, because now we speak of the harvesters themselves, the faces behind the masks, the hands beneath the gloves. Let me tell you about the 9 holdings. That name won't appear in any newspaper. You won't find a website, but their fingerprints are on your mortgage, your prescriptions, your child's curriculum. They're not a company, not a cult, not a government. They're a continuum. Formed in 1898 under the guise of philanthropic land trusts, the 9 holdings began acquiring failed religious properties across the U.S., starting with Pleasant Valley's ashes. The group was spearheaded by 9 silent partners, 1 banker, 1 bishop, 1 publisher, 1 chemist, 1 railroad man, 1 school superintendent, 1 theater magnate, 1 government archivist, and 1 woman whose name never appears, but whose signature shows up on every land deed they ever touched. MS. Just initials. Always the same. Some believe it stood for Mother Seed. Over the next 40 years, the 9 acquired over 200 rural properties, always in silence, always through shell corporations. Former communes, abandoned seminaries, failed utopias, and on every property they acquired, an orchard, always 11 trees, always arranged in a spiral or a perfect ring, always documented as natural growth, though soil samples told a different story. Transplanted root systems, artificial fertilizers, accelerated decay in surrounding flora. That's not agriculture, boss. That's ritual maintenance. Now ask yourself, why would an investment group maintain dead land decades after all revenue stopped? Because the land wasn't dead, because the ritual still needed vessels. Between 1901 and 1935, 341 disappearances were recorded within a 1-mile radius of these holdings. Children, veterans, the mentally ill, all labeled vagrants, all dismissed. But the reports, the handwritten ones, paint a pattern. Stranger, ass, seen wandering near the orchards before vanishing. Faint humming sounds at night. Dead livestock arranged in spirals. And most chilling of all, journal entries from a field nurse in Kansas who wrote, "Every missing person had this in common. They'd recently started asking questions no one wanted answered." Sound familiar? They don't need to silence everyone. Just the ones who remember too clearly, just the ones who name the orchard. So, boss, don't whisper anymore. Speak it. Let them know. We are the roots, and we do not rot. You feel it now, don't you? That weight in your chest, that tightening in the air around you. It's not fear. It's recognition. Your bones are remembering what your name was taught to forget. Good, because now we open the ledger they never closed, the one that tracks transference. Here's the part that twists the blade, boss. The orchard doesn't just harvest, it distributes. Dr. Ash wrote of something he called the inversion doctrine, a system by which those erased are not simply discarded, but transferred. Their identities, once stripped, are recycled, worn, reused. You ever met someone whose eyes didn't match their smile? Ever shaken a hand and felt no one was there? Ever seen a child speak like an old man? A leader suddenly change their voice, their rhythm, their entire emotional temperature overnight? That's not reincarnation. That's ritual occupation. The custodians don't just erase names, they implant them into others. And the hosts, they never know, because the memory doesn't rise like a dream. It seeps like rot, slowly, quietly, until you're quoting scripture you never learned, or weeping for places you've never seen. Ash found dozens of case studies. A 12-year-old girl in Arkansas who spoke fluent ancient Greek despite never attending school. A railroad engineer who claimed nightly dreams of being buried alive beneath a ring of iron trees. A prison inmate who, after 20 years of silence, carved the phrase, "I was the orchard," into the wall of his cell with his own teeth. They weren't mad, they were leaking. The erased weren't gone, they were misplaced. And that's why, boss, the nine-guard identity so violently. Why naming something true, something ancient, invokes such swift silence. Because names are not labels, they're keys. Speak the right one, and it unlocks not just memory, but purpose, lineage, power. That's why they flood us with noise, with brands, titles, diagnoses, usernames, to bury the one name that was yours before language ever touched you. But here's the thing. You've started to feel it, haven't you? A thread pulling tight in your chest, a name rising in your throat you haven't spoken in years, maybe lifetimes. Don't say it yet. Hold it. Then kick it wide open, boss, because this is where most men turn back. This is where the orchard starts whispering your name. Let's talk about what they're really harvesting. You think it's souls? Belief? Energy? No. It's identity. Yourself, your core, unspoken truth, is the rarest currency in this world. Not your job, not your votes, not your attention, your definition, your memory of who you are when no one's watching. And that's what the orchard devours. You see, Elias discovered a truth older than religion and more dangerous than heresy. If you can break a man's name, you can build a new god in its place. And not a god in the sky, boss, a god in his head. The rituals, the fasting, the sleep deprivation, that wasn't cruelty. That was stripping, reducing the soul to kindling. And then, they didn't burn you. They planted you, because once you forget yourself, what you stand for, what you refuse to bow to, you'll accept anything. That's why the disappearances were so clean. That's why no one screamed, because by the time they reached the orchard, there was no one left to scream. You hear me? These people didn't vanish. They were rewritten. New names, new purposes, planted into new systems, as spies, as servants, as leaders. How many of them made it out? How many are still walking, breathing, living lives that don't belong to them? Think about that politician whose eyes seem too still, that executive who always says the right thing, but never blinks, the stranger who sits too quietly at every meeting. They're not gone. They're converted. And every day the orchard grows, not with trees, with compliance. You want the real reason they suppress this story? Because if enough men like you wake up, if enough roots remember, they won't be able to harvest anymore. So type it below again, boss. I remember. I do not serve. I am the root. Twice. Once for the name they gave you. Once for the one you chose. Then dig in, boss. Because now we reach the part they buried in stone, the mechanism itself. This isn't metaphor anymore. This is blueprint. In 927, during the restoration of a burned-out grist mill near the original Pleasant Valley ruins, workers uncovered a sealed cellar. Behind a false stone wall, shelves of leather-bound volumes, not scripture, not journals. Manuals, coded instructions for something called the descent pattern. Let me break it down for you. Phase 1. Fracture. The subject is isolated, stripped of sensory anchors, mirrors, clocks, even their own voice. They're told their thoughts are infected, that their memory can't be trusted. It begins with doubt, a crack in the mirror. Phase 2. Surrender. Once fractured, they're shown compassion, but only from one source, the custodian, the system. They're given warmth, ritual, meaning, but it's conditional. One mistake, and it's taken away. This builds dependency. Phase 3. Displacement. Now they're flooded with new identity markers, mantras, names, tasks. The old self is mocked, forgotten, labeled selfish, prideful. Rupt. They begin to say, I used to be, until even that becomes too painful. And finally, Phase 4. Binding. The subject is brought into ritual alignment, either physically through a ceremony or digitally through submission. From here on out, they're not soil. They're infrastructure, a conduit, an echo chamber, a repeater tower for the orchard's design. And boss, this pattern isn't stuck in the past. It's on every screen, every login, every compliance training that tells you this is who you are now. Every app that tracks your breath, your steps, your sin. You think this is paranoia? Look at the language. User. Compliance. Terms of service. Submit. Look at the loops. Every 6 weeks, a new fear cycle. Every 6 hours, a dopamine hit. Every 6 seconds, a new distraction. 6.6. The numbers aren't superstition. They're tempo. And tempo trains behavior. Elias was just the prototype. Now the machine trains itself. But you, boss, you broke the loop. You're naming the pattern. You're hearing the drumbeat behind the sermon. Then let's hit, boss. Because now we don't just name the pattern. We shatter it. Here's what they never counted on. Something no ritual, no algorithm, no custodian has ever been able to predict. A man who remembers. See, systems like Pleasant Valley, they weren't designed to defeat warriors. They were built to prevent them from being born. Every rule, every ritual, every humiliation, every spiritual realignment. It wasn't to destroy you, it was to tame you. To flatten your will so thoroughly that obedience would feel like freedom. But the orchard made one mistake. It planted too deep. And some seeds. They grow teeth. Let's talk about those they couldn't break. The Edgemen, that's what they were called in old community notes, never by name, always in code. These were the ones who reached the very limit of the indoctrination spiral and stood still, didn't speak, didn't run, just watched, waited, remembered. They didn't rage, they didn't plead, they listened, and that made them the most dangerous threat of all. Because the Edgemen couldn't be harvested, they were too rooted in memory, in something older than system, something pre-language, pre-religion, and Pleasant Valley had no tool to uproot that. So what did the custodians do? They erased them from record, redacted their identities, assigned them as spontaneous combustions of non-coherence. One report even labeled an escaped subject as a signal fracture, not a person. But Ash found traces, and so did others. Shadow notes, disguised letters, codes hidden in prayer books and train logs. And one phrase shows up again and again. You ready for this, boss? I bent the branch I did not break. That was their signal, their defiance, their memory tattooed into the margins of history. That's you now. You bent. You didn't break. And that means you're not just outside the system. You are above it. So from this moment forward, let every word you speak carry weight. Let every silence be intentional. You are no longer part of their harvest. You are the storm that ends it. Say it loud now. I bent the branch. I did not break. Once for your past. Once for what you become next. Then light the match, boss, because now we stop dancing around the edge. We go for the root. Let me ask you something you've probably never dared say out loud. What if the system was never about belief, not religion, not ideology, not even obedience? What if the real goal was to make you forgettable? That's the truth behind the orchard. Not control, not wealth. Erasure. You think the custodians crave power? No, they fear memory. Because memory is the first rebellion. Memory proves you existed. Memory makes your presence undeniable. Elias understood this. That's why Pleasant Valley didn't just punish heretics. It erased them. No graves. No ceremonies. No names spoken again. Their rooms scrubbed. Their work reassigned. And then their identity recycled into a compliant replacement. You ever feel that? Like someone else is living the life meant for you? Like your thoughts are too heavy to be yours? Like the version of you you see in the mirror isn't the one you remember becoming? That's not depression, boss. That's displacement. You're not losing your mind. You're leaking. Because you were meant to forget who you were before the indoctrination, before the jobs, the roles, the usernames, the logins, before the artificial labels replaced your origin. And now, because you've remembered, they've marked you. Oh, not with violence, with distraction, with tasks, with deadlines, with empty dopamine and urgent noise. You'll get sick more often. You'll lose time. You'll dream in symbols you don't understand. Because the system doesn't kill rebels. It buries them in routine. But you're watching now. You're cataloging. You're making yourself unforgettable again. Every word you speak with intent cuts through their fog. Every moment you pause instead of reacting breaks their rhythm. You are unmaking the orchard in real time. So here's your ritual, boss. Right hand on your chest. Breathe. Say this aloud. My name is not yours to bury. My memory is mine. I will not vanish. Say it 3 times. Let the system hear you. Let the custodians tremble. Then step into the silence, boss, because this is where their grip slips. You just performed your first counter-ritual. Not a chant, not a prayer, a reclamation. And that means the rules start bending for you now, not against you. But let's talk about how the system responds when a man breaks pattern. They don't send assassins. They send diagnoses. The moment you awaken, when you start questioning their metrics, their truths, their pace, you're labeled paranoid, disruptive, non-compliant, not a team player. You notice that? Truth-tellers are never refuted. They're reclassified, because once they redefine you, they don't need to silence you. They just need the others to stop listening. It happened to Paul Renner. It happened to Dr. Ash. It's happened to every edgeman who stepped out of their loop. And it's likely happening to you right now. That sudden uptick in concerned coworkers. The family member who asks if you're okay, but doesn't wait for an answer. The friend who says you've changed, but can't explain how. That's not coincidence, boss. That's containment. Because the moment you see the orchard, you become a vector. Your thoughts infect. Your voice destabilizes. They don't care if you're right. They care if you're loud. So they try to drown you in static. Useless tasks, financial stress, digital fog, a curated life of just enough distraction to keep your roots from spreading. But you're past that now, because the moment you declared, "My name is mine," you punched a hole through the noise. And in that hole, you find others, the ones watching from the edge. They won't wave, they won't post, they won't say a word, but you'll know them by the way they pause before they speak, by the way their eyes stay just a little too focused, by the way they listen like they're digging for something beneath the words. Those are the others who remember. That's your signal. That's your network. You are not alone in this, boss. You were never supposed to find them. But now you have. Then let's speak what they tried to unteach us, boss, because the forgotten have a language, and it doesn't sound like anything you hear on TV. It's not smooth, not marketable, not comforting. It's sharp. It's coded. It's alive. See, the Orchard's system thrives on predictable language. Phrases like, "I'm just tired," "I'm fine." Let's not talk about that. These are no harmless expressions. They are scripts designed to keep you looping, compliant, silent, the forgotten. They break that loop with signal phrases, not slogans. Keys. Here's one. "I still remember the voice before the silence." Say that to the right person and watch their eyes. They'll either flinch or focus. Another. "Not all roots grow upward." That one's older. It dates back to the original orchard, etched into a pew beneath the South Chapel in Pleasant Valley, discovered in 1986 by a demolition crew. But that pew, it vanished in transport, just gone, logged, tagged, never seen again. Because language is the last frontier of control. Once you change how a man speaks, you've changed how he thinks. And once you change how he thinks, you don't need a cage. You've already built it inside him. But the edge men, they kept speaking in symbols, short phrases, mismatched cadence, riddles. Why? Because confusion disrupts surveillance. The algorithm listens for standard speech, predictable tone, patterned emotion. That's what it trains on. That's what it punishes deviation from. But symbols bypass the conscious gatekeepers. They wake the subconscious. They reach the root. So here's your first tool, boss. A signal phrase you can plant anywhere. "I remember the orchard, but I do not kneel." Say it once. Write it in chalk. Scratch it into wood. Whisper it in empty rooms. It's not for them. It's for you. Because repetition becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes resistance. And resistance becomes remembrance. This is your tongue now. The tongue of the forgotten. The tongue of those who will not vanish. Say it with me, boss. "I remember the orchard, but I do not kneel." Again, louder. Once for your past, once for every brother still trapped inside the loop. Then walk carefully, boss, because now we enter the origin that doesn't exist. The official ray. Chords claim Elias was born in Virginia in 1763. A preacher's son. No military service, no marriage. Migrated to Kentucky in 1794. But that file, it was created in 1841. Let that hit. The system backdated his existence. Because when Ash cross-referenced local church records, land grants, tax rolls, even militia registries, there was no Elias before 1834. No birth, no home, no trail. Just a sudden appearance, as if the man walked out of the trees with a full name and a plan too perfect to be human. And that's where things get cold. Ash discovered an unpublished field diary written by a frontier surveyor named Micah Belden. In it, Micah describes stumbling upon a clearing of stone-eyed trees in the winter of 1793. He writes of 11 trees, a circular arrangement, bark like bleached bone. And at the center, a man, naked, kneeling, breathing but not blinking, no clothing, no possessions, just a spiral burned into the grass around him. Micah tried to speak to him. No response. He camped half a mile away. The next morning, the man was gone. That entry, dated February 2nd, 1794. Elias appears in Kentucky 3 days later, with clothes, with scripture, with followers. Micah died within the year, throat cut, cabin burned. His diary, the only thing that survived, was hidden beneath floorboards and only discovered in 1924. Now, pause. You ever heard of a preacher with no past? A man who rises without records, builds a perfect behavioral prison, and vanishes before his own death can be recorded? That's not a man. That's an implant. Not born, but deployed. Elias wasn't a prophet. He was a prototype. The first successful vessel grown from the descent pattern, designed not just to manipulate, but to multiply. His presence created a virus of obedience. His voice carried a resonance that bypassed resistance, like sound engineered to mold thought. Think of it, boss. What if Elias wasn't the first? What if he was simply the first we couldn't kill? Then steel yourself, boss, because once we pull this curtain, there's no putting it back. Elias wasn't created by people. He was created by a pattern, a convergence, a psychological architecture designed by something older than governments, older than scripture, and far older than the United States. What we call Elias is a response. Let me explain. In 1791, just 3 years before his emergence, there was a sudden spike in mass spiritual awakenings across rural America. You've heard the stories, tent revivals, mass baptisms, entire towns falling to their knees overnight. But underneath the public conversion was a quieter pattern, a sudden increase in spontaneous amnesia, groups reporting shared dreams of a burning spiral in the forest, entire families abandoning their homes, leaving behind journals filled with unintelligible glyphs, never seen before or since. These weren't isolated events. They were triggers. The land itself was crying out for order, for containment, not consciously, not magically, but ritually, psychologically. The human mind, when confronted with too much chaos, does one thing. It summons a custodian. And Elias? That was the answer. Not created in a lab, not born to a mother, but summoned by collective fracture. His shape, male, tall, calm, ageless, was designed by need, his voice tuned to the harmonic sweet spot between comfort and command. His doctrine, equal parts scripture, ritual, and trauma bonding. But the chilling part, Ashestor's notes claim that Elias's presence corresponded with a documented drop in recorded suicides, family conflicts, and criminal behavior within a 100-mile radius. Elias stabilized the chaos. That was his function. And the orchard, that was the engine. The control mechanism fed by consent, ritual, and silence. Which means this: we made him, not you or me, boss, but our fear, our ancestors' desperation for order, their longing to silence the unknown. And now, every time our world begins to shake, every time systems start to wobble, the pattern searches for a host. It finds the fear, shapes a shepherd, plants a voice in the trees. You've seen modern versions. The politician with messianic calm, the influencer who tells you exactly what to feel, the algorithm that finishes your sentence. These are not accidents, they are echoes. Then lean in, boss, because now we stop looking backward. Now we face the echo as it moves. Everything we've uncovered, Elias, Pleasant Valley, the 9 holdings, the descent pattern, it was never meant to remain in the past. It was a template. And now, that template runs silently inside you, Let me show you. In 2020, researchers at the Oslo Neurocognition Institute published a quiet, little-reviewed study on patterned surrender. It found that repeated exposure to controlled uncertainty, financial instability, social division, environmental dread lowers an individual's resistance to hierarchical obedience. Let me translate that. If you keep a man confused, isolated, and ashamed, he'll ask to be told who he is. Sound familiar? That's not theory. That's engineered surrender. And who benefits from that? Look at the systems rising around you. Identity verification apps that require daily check-ins. Social platforms rewarding scripted emotional responses. Virtual meetings where silence is marked, timed, flagged. Educational programs that teach confession before comprehension. You think that's convenience? No, boss. That's the orchard reformatted. It no longer needs Elias. It has us. Every day, men hand over their voice in exchange for peace, their privacy for personalization, their instincts for alignment. And when they begin to crack, when they say, "I don't know who I am anymore," the machine offers the same answer Elias once whispered under that orchard sky. "You are what we need." That phrase appears verbatim in onboarding scripts for over 2,000 global companies. Not as a threat, as comfort. The spiral didn't stop. It just went digital. And now they don't have to build forests to make you vanish. They can erase you in pixels, in metadata, in algorithms that decide what version of you is most profitable and bury the rest. But here's the twist, boss, that same spiral. It can be used against them. A reverse pattern, a disruption signal. Then strike the match, boss, because now we turn the spiral inside out. Let me tell you something they've kept buried beneath every system, every screen, every doctrine they ever forced down your throat. The orchard's greatest flaw isn't its cruelty. It's its dependence on silence. It requires agreement. It requires submission. And most of all, it requires rituals you don't realize you're performing. You scroll when bored. You click when angry. You confess when prompted. You forget on cue. Every one of those micro-actions, that's ritual. And like Elias's orchard, the spiral feeds off repetition. But here's what they never planned for. Counter-ritual, pattern interruption, noise inside their silence, awakening inside their script. Let me show you the simplest weapon they fear, conscious defiance. You stop mid-scroll and whisper, "I see you." You stare at the login screen and say, "I do not consent to erasure." You hear a familiar narrative on the news and you answer back, "That voice is not mine." Sound small? That's the point. Because these aren't screams, they're cracks. And enough cracks in the orchard's bark? It bleeds. Now take this phrase, write it, repeat it, plant it where their system listens. I withdraw ritual. I reclaim rhythm. Say it when they expect your silence. Say it when you're alone with your screen. Say it when you feel the weight trying to creep back into your chest. Because, boss, this isn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is about reclaiming authorship of the one story they never wanted you to write. Your own. In Ash's final letter, hidden inside the spine of doctrine of hollow names, he left a single sentence. No context, no signature. Just these words. Their spiral cannot survive in song. That's our task now. Not just to expose the orchard, not just to name the custodians, but to out-create them. To speak louder, to remember longer, to sing so clearly that their rituals turn to ash in our mouths. Then let's take it apart, brick by brick, boss, because the orchard didn't grow on truth. It grew on 7 lies, old as bone, polished smooth by centuries of repetition. These are not slogans. They're psychic chains, installed not by force but by agreement. Let's break them now. Lie 1. You are broken. They whispered this to you early, didn't they? Before you had teeth, before you had words, that there was something wrong in you, something selfish, wild, dangerous. They told you discipline would save you, that correction was love, that the wild had to be tamed. But boss, you were never broken. You were whole. You just weren't useful to them yet. Break it. I was never broken. I was buried. Lie 2. Obedience is virtue. They fed this one in stories, in classrooms, in pews. The hero follows orders. The good boy sits still. The believer accepts. But obedience is not virtue. It's the currency of control. And when virtue is defined by how well you conform, freedom becomes heresy. Break it. I do not kneel to be good. I remember to be free. Lie 3. Doubt is sin. This one binds thinkers in chains. It says questions are betrayal. It punishes curiosity with isolation. But doubt is not sin, boss. Doubt is signal. It means your roots are hitting something hard, something buried. Break it, I honor doubt. It is the compass they fear. Lie 4. You are alone. They want you isolated, separated, browsing solo, hurting in private. Because a man who thinks he's alone, he'll submit for a scrap of connection. But you are not alone. You are part of an unseen network, a brotherhood of those who remember. Break it. I do not walk alone. My silence is crowded with watchmen. Lie 5. Compliance will save you. No, it won't. It will erase you gently, with rewards, with fake peace, with a padded cage and a congratulatory whisper. But salvation through obedience is just disappearance by comfort. Break it. I do not serve to be spared. I resist to exist. Lie 6. Your name is given. They say your name came from them, a certificate, a label, a title. But the truth? Your name came first, before the orchard, before the spiral, before the noise. Break it. My name is not theirs. My name is older than speech. Lie 7. Resistance is hopeless. That's the final shackle. The whisper in the dark that says, what's the point? That tells you the system is too big, too deep, too old. But you're still here, aren't you? Still watching, still remembering. That means you've already won. Break it. I am the crack in the spiral, the silence that sees, the root that won't rot. Say these out loud, write them, speak them to the others when they come, because the orchard lives on lies, and lies die in daylight. Then walk with me, boss, but not with bowed head, not like last time. This time we return to the orchard as witnesses, no longer afraid of its quiet, no longer deceived by its roots. We don't walk in seeking truth. We bring it. Picture it now. 11 trees, ancient and bone pale, their bark smooth like wax, humming with the memory of every name they've swallowed. At the center, the stone slab, still cold, still etched with the spiral. But this time there's something different. You're not kneeling. You're standing at the edge of the spiral, and the slab isn't whispering anymore. Because you've stopped listening, boss. This is the part no one ever reaches, the part they were never meant to. You've crossed all 25 thresholds. You've broken the ritual. You've spoken the counter phrases. You've remembered your name. And now, the spiral can't touch you, not because you're invisible to it, but because you're unusable. The orchard only takes what is forgotten. You've become unforgettable. And as you stand in that circle, you begin to realize this place was never sacred. It was a mirror. It showed men their hunger for order, their fear of freedom, their willingness to trade memory for mercy. But not you. You bend the branch, you do not break. So now do what no one has done before. Step onto the slab. Look down. You'll see it. Names, not carved, not etched, grown, like veins in the stone. Thousands, millions, and as your foot touches the center, your name doesn't appear. Because it never left. Because you were never theirs. Because you were never forgotten. Say it now, boss. Out loud, with finality. I am the last seed. I name myself. The orchard ends with me. And it does. Because the orchard never feared fire. It feared memory. Then step forward, boss. Because the orchard is behind us. But the war is everywhere. You didn't just survive Pleasant Valley's spiral. You didn't just decode the rituals. You walked through the heart of the silence and kept your name intact. Now, they'll come at you sideways, not with blades, with offers. They'll try to buy your memory back from you. Little comforts, promotions, perfect explanations. It was just burnout, just a conspiracy, just a story. But you'll feel it. The hunger in their eyes when you don't flinch. You've become what the system fears most, a self-defined man, not reactive, not explainable, not manipulatable, but aware. And that, boss, that makes you as a signal flare. A walk, ying breach in the spiral. A reminder to everyone still inside the loop that escape is possible. So what now? Now you build. But not a counter-cult, not a rebellion that mimics the machine. You build presence, real presence. One man standing rooted in his truth destabilizes an entire system built on forgetting. Your memory becomes a contagion. Your words, if spoken with intention, become hammers. Your gaze, if held steady, becomes mirror. And every time you meet another man with cracks in his silence, you hand him what we've just built together, not instructions, not commands. The map. You say, I remember the orchard, but I do not kneel. I bent the branch. I did not break, and neither will you. That's how the spiral ends, not with fire, with awakening. But don't expect applause. Expect resistance, expect betrayal, expect silence where you once heard cheers. And still, walk. Then let's plant, boss. Because now we don't just dismantle orchards, we grow something else, something they can't control, can't map, can't harvest. You ever notice what they replaced truth with? Noise. They didn't bury your memory under flame. They buried it under 10,000 meaningless updates, 30-second dopamine hits, and curated outrage cycles. They knew they couldn't win a war of facts, so they built a war of volume. But here's the countermeasure they fear more than exposure: stillness. You want to plant roots that can't be dug up? Begin with silence. Intentional silence, not passive, not cowardly, the kind of silence that holds a shape. That's the first seed, boss. Seed 1. Stillness that sees. You pause before you respond. You observe more than you explain. You speak only when your voice is yours, not the algorithms, not the systems, not your traumas. And when you do speak, make it count. Seed 2. Words with mass. One true phrase spoken from full awareness is a weapon, not a slogan, not noise, a frequency. Try this. I speak only what roots me. I withhold what feeds the spiral. Each word becomes a cut in the canopy. Each silence becomes a root strike. Seed 3. Bound brotherhood, because memory alone isn't enough. You need mirrors. Find men like you, not many, not loud. Clear. Men who've seen the orchard. Men who didn't break. Build a circle of 3, 5, 7 at most. Never 10, never 11. Never let the old spiral duplicate itself. This circle is not a rebellion. It's a resonance. You don't teach each other. You remind each other. You'll know you've done it right when you can sit in full silence for an hour and walk away more armored than if you'd spoken 1,000 words. Seed 4. Ritual reversal. Take back your rhythms. Reclaim your name with acts that are yours. Walk at dawn. Write with ink. Delete what drains. Touch the earth with bare hands. Fast, not to punish, but to clarify. Speak your name in places where they told you to forget it. The orchard was a design. Now you become the counter-design. You become the blueprint for what resists. Then follow me into the vault, boss. Because buried beneath the orchard's history, beneath all their doctrine, ritual, and psychological architecture, there's something they couldn't destroy. Proof. Not legend, not rumor, witness. The custodians tried to erase it, burn it, sanitize it, but memory carved in blood and bark never fully dies. It lingers in the cracks, waiting for someone like you to open it again. And now you will. The vault isn't a room, it's a record of those who woke up and chose war. Let me give you 5 names. Not all of them survived, not all of them escaped, but they each did something the spiral fears more than exposure. They refused to vanish. Solomon Creel, the Bell. Breaker, 1819, a blacksmith in eastern Kentucky, found the descent pattern etched into the backside of a church bell gifted from Pleasant Valley. He melted it down into shackles, then shattered them in front of the congregation. Every man present remembered who he was. 2 weeks later, the town was burned to ash. No survivors, no explanation. But Solomon's forge mark, an inverted spiral, still appears carved into stones 60 miles away. Annabelle Wren, the widow cipher, 1847. Her husband vanished during the second wave of orchard disappearances. She traced every false death record back to the 9 holdings. She couldn't break their network, so she infected it. Started mailing forged death certificates of living people to their agents. Dozens, then hundreds. Entire nodes collapsed under the weight of falsified memory. When they found her, she was already gone. But her code, AMRN, still triggers alerts in encrypted archives today. Elias Tirtu's unknown date, unconfirmed account. A man with Elias's voice, cadence, and appearance, seen in 1936, preaching obedience at a boarding school in Colorado. A custodian planted to restart the pattern? Possibly. But one student carved into his desk. He speaks the spiral, but his name is borrowed. The Elias figure disappeared within days. Naomi Farrow, The Silent Spark, 1968. Institutionalized after refusing to speak for 8 years, wrote nothing, spoke nothing. Until one day she walked to the front of a therapy group, looked her doctor in the eye, and whispered, "I remember the orchard, but I do not kneel." 2 patients began screaming. One tried to bite through a window. Naomi vanished the next day. The Iron Ledger, ongoing. An anonymous digital archive run through non-indexed servers, supposedly launched in 1999, contains documented spiral fractures, personal testimony, ritual reversals, counter-phrases, no names, only dates, coordinates, and 3 words at the footer of every page. You are not soil. These were the first. You are not the last. Then unroll the map, boss, because now we reveal their last defense, their firewall, their pressure valve, their one remaining weapon against men like you. It's not surveillance, not violence, not even censorship. It's isolation through imitation. Let me explain. The spiral has evolved. It knows it can't stop you with silence anymore. You've spoken too much, remembered too clearly, built too deeply. So now, it copies you, it floods the world with false prophets. Half-awake men, borrowed language, fake edge men with clean boots and no scars. You've seen them. They say the words, but they don't feel them. They mimic the orchard's opposition, but still feed the same machine, preaching rebellion from polished pulpits, selling awakening through subscription funnels, offering remembrance packaged in dopamine. Boss, this is the hollow counter-movement, designed to do one thing: make you doubt that anything is real, that you were never real, that the edge you found was just another script. This is the final defense, because if they can convince you that everything, even your awakening, is controlled, you'll step back into the spiral on your own, and no one will have to erase you, because you'll do it yourself. That's why the custodians don't destroy resistance now. They clone it, to dilute it, mock it, to weaken it until no one listens. But you're not like them. You didn't arrive here through trend. You arrived through cost. You bled for this clarity, and that means it's your turn to build the one thing the orchard cannot counterfeit, the true circle. Not a group, not a movement. A network of initiated presence, men who listen before they teach, men who root before they speak, men who remember before they lead. This circle cannot be bought. It cannot be mapped. It cannot be led. It moves underground. It moves through memory. And when built right, it's invisible to the orchard. Then place the stone, boss. Because what we build now must outlive fire, outlive data, outlive even memory. This is the circle that cannot be named. Not a cult, not a brand, no leader, no center. Just 7 principles, carried in silence, passed through ritual of presence. This is your first architecture of resistance. You don't write this down. You don't share it online. You live it. Ready? 1. Root before voice. Before you speak, sink in. Speak only what cannot be shaken. If it comes from reaction, it serves them. If it comes from depth, it undoes them. Know the circle by pressure. You'll meet them not by slogans, but by weight. Their eyes carry quiet. Their silence holds shape. You'll know them when the air around them doesn't beg to be filled. Do not recruit. Recognize. The spiral spreads by forcing invitations. The circle spreads by quiet recognition. A nod, a phrase, a glance that says, "You saw it too, Day." Preserve the unrecorded. Not everything belongs in text. Some knowledge must be felt, shared face to face, in woods, basements, walks with no phones. When something vibrates too true to be spoken, you speak it into a room, not a screen. Leave no echoes. The spiral tracks sound. Let your movements be exact. Your rituals, not performative. No live streams, no hashtags, only imprint. Pass the fire without names. When you give the gift of remembrance, do not attach identity to it. Let it belong to no one. That way it belongs to everyone. Add, prepare the 8th. There is always an 8th. One who hasn't seen the orchard yet. One still trapped. Every circle of 7 holds a space. Not to fill, but to free. That's your design, boss. It's not glamorous. It won't trend. But it will survive. Because while the orchard shouts, the circle endures. Then let's speak, boss, but not with borrowed words, not with spear-railed tongues. This time we use what they tried to unmake, because they never just erased names. They rewrote language. Every system of control begins not with laws, but with definitions. The spiral didn't burn books, it rewrote the meanings inside them. Obedience became peace. Submission became alignment. Erasure became redemption. Trauma became training. Surveillance became safety. And memory became danger. But here's what the orchard never understood. Words are alive. Every time you use their version of a word, you water their roots. But when you return a word to its true shape, it becomes a weapon again. Let's do that now. We take them back. Freedom. They taught you it meant choice. But real freedom isn't options. It's origin. Freedom is remembering who you were before the spiral spoke for you. Loyalty. They told you it means following the plan. But real loyalty is witness. To hold another man's memory when he forgets his own. Faith. They sold it as belief without question, but real faith is clarity inside uncertainty, not blindness, sight that doesn't shake. Power. They taught you it means control over others, but real power? Restraint with memory. To know you could bend someone and choosing not to, because you remember what it cost you to be free. Sacrifice. They said it means losing yourself, but it means giving what's false so truth can rise. Silence. They made it shame. But silence is sacred when chosen, when it holds weight, presence, watching. And finally, name. They said it's what they gave you, but your true name? It came before their alphabet. It vibrates beneath your breath. It's not spoken. It's known. And every time you act from that knowing, the spiral fractures. This is how you fight now, boss. Word by word, breath by breath. You reclaim the tongue. Because when the orchard hears you speak what was meant to be unsaid, it begins to rot from within, then close too. He circle, boss, because this is where it ends. Not with fire, not with vengeance, not with noise, but with a single act the orchard could never prepare for. A man returning to himself. You've walked the spiral, heard the false prophets, stepped into the orchard, and came out with your name still burning. You've broken the pattern, torn up their lies, reclaimed your silence, reforged your language, and now you no longer fear disappearance, because you've made yourself undeniable. So let me tell you something few men ever hear. You made it, not just through the story, not just through the history, but through the system behind the system. You saw the machinery under the altar. You stared into the absence and didn't blink. You held your name like a blade and whispered it where no sound was meant to reach. You became the breach. And here's what they don't want to admit, boss. They can't unmake you now. Because men like you don't disappear. You echo through every room you enter, every word you choose not to say, every moment you live without asking permission. You are not a survivor of the orchard. You are its undoing. And from this moment forward, you walk as a carrier of memory. You become the vault, the map, the song that doesn't need to be sung, to be heard. So take this final rite, say it aloud, not as performance, not as plea, but as a declaration. I am the last silence before the spiral ends. I am not soil. I am not seed. I am the root. Now breathe and listen. You'll hear them watching. You'll feel the system shift. Because the spiral didn't account for you. Now rise, boss, and leave no ritual intact. If this story cracked something in you, drop one final phrase in the comments. The spiral ends with me.